Welcome to 10, the Tenant Experience Network. I'm your host, David Abrams. In this episode, we are connecting with Lee Odess, CEO, Access Control Executive Brief. In this episode, we learn how Lee's career journey began with a position in the security industry at BRIVO. He eventually discovered that it was best to work on his own within the building access space and focus on the digital transformation that is impacting the industry. Lee sees the world of access control from the perspective of the end user and how it contributes to a better customer experience. Lee has always had a focus on community building and sees his role in the building access space as doing just that. He believes the past has helped inform the present and should not be overlooked when reviewing the evolution of property technology. Lee was instrumental in creating an interactive experience at Cretech in London to help better sell the ecosystem around access control. We had an interesting conversation about the collaboration between building owners and occupiers as they work to provide a more seamless experience. Our conversation goes on to explore the intersection of digital space and physical space. Lee is a great spokesperson and leader for the access control world, and I look forward to continuing our conversation as technology and commercial real estate continues to evolve. We're excited to share this podcast with you, so be sure to subscribe to 10 so you never miss an episode of the Tenant Experience Network. And now I would like to welcome Lee to the show. I'm really glad you could be with us today, and I have to thank you again for coming on season 4 and a return visitor. I went back and checked it out, season 1. About the 4th episode. So great to have you back on the program.
No, always. I've enjoyed watching you and the journey that you've done over the season. So it's an honor to be back, and I appreciate what you do.
Yeah, and it has been a journey. That's a good way to describe it. And speaking of journeys, my favorite question actually is to talk about your journey to your current position role. And even since we last talked, I think it's taken a few twists and turns. So tell us how you got started in the business.
Yeah, so started in the business, I guess. So it goes way back to my wife and I had an integration company here in the DC area, ended up selling that, and then was introduced to a local company called BRIVO, which is an access control manufacturer. I ended up getting a job there. And then that sort of sparked my sort of journey within the security industry, and handful of stops here and there in between. And I've come to the conclusion that I am not a really good employee, so I enjoy being on my own. And I also like the industry and think that there is a transition happening, just like other industries. As a digital transformation, I see an opportunity for us to tell a much bigger, better story than the traditional one that we've told. And I've decided to go back out on my own to focus on really the today and the tomorrow side of our industry. And tell stories, do some reports, help sort of be a bridge to the external markets of what we have, and have conversations like this on behalf of the access control and smart lock industry.
Right. Well, like you, I have been an entrepreneur most of my career. I held a job for 4 years after university, and that's probably the last time I worked for someone. So I get that, and I think that would be hard to go that route, having been an entrepreneur as long as I have.
Yeah, it's taken me, I think, 46 years to come to that realization.
Better late than
Hey,
never.
yeah, it's like I can't wait for the next 46.
Sounds good. So again, obviously, and maybe this ties back to that realization, but why do you think you were so uniquely suited to this opportunity? First, I'll split it into two. First, to the industry, why has building access just become such an important part of your life? And maybe then the other side of that is, why do you think, being independent, being an entrepreneur, working for yourself is probably the right place for you?
Yeah, I think from the access control standpoint is that it's been somewhat of a nascent cottage industry that has been really focused on a single value proposition, an important one, which is keeping people safe and keeping bad people out of places.
Right.
And also, if you think about the amount of times that we enter and exit places, it's something that we do a lot, but we don't necessarily think about. We think about it when something bad happens, but if it's going right, we don't really think about it at all. But it's really the initial user experience of physical spaces where, whether it's a card, fob, phone, visitor management system, whatever it might be. That is the relationship that human beings have with this sort of physical space. So it's an important one. It's a
Right.
utility that I think has a great opportunity. And frankly, we've been an industry that has never really invested heavily in marketing outside of product marketing. It's been very channel driven. And it's been an industry that the feature of the industry has been like, don't worry about it. It's a risk for you to get involved. We'll handle it and take it on.
Mm.
And we've isolated ourselves with the idea that that helps deliver better security and safety. But as things have changed and moved on, there's a different story that is in addition to. So it's not an or conversation that still
Right.
exists. This is now the ability to tell a different story for a different opportunity that in a lot of ways our industry can command and occupy that space because we can deliver safety and security. We have done it for very many years. So I feel like now is the time, especially as buildings are going more digital. And if you look at it, whether it's tenant engagement applications, data, whatever the reasons are that companies are bringing this technology and trying to apply it to it, they fundamentally all always come back to the need to integrate or work with the access control, because the thing that
Right.
most people do consistently and is a need is get into the building. You
Yeah.
don't have to order lattes. You don't have to reserve rooms. Those are all nice sort of additional features that help with the experience. But security is going to be there. You have to get on the internet. That's another one. That's why I think these utilities have this opportunity to enhance and engage with whatever the other things are that are happening in the building. And access control has just, again, because of how we've been for so many years, we've gotten away with saying, nah, we don't need to. But now there's enough groundswell, enough opportunity, enough value creation, enough external threat, like all of these things that are happening
Right.
to where our industry is having to show up. And I saw an opportunity to help shepherd that message and go tell some stories and identify some things. And my, a little bit into like why me type of a thing is that if I look back at my career, no matter where I've been, something that I've always sort of focused on is community building. And I didn't know what that word was until I read about it. It was like, oh wait, that's what I do. I happen to apply it here in access control because that's the market that I've been in, the relationships that I have, the opportunity that I saw, and frankly, just wanted to go do it.
Right.
So if I Venn diagrammed building community with the liking to talk about where things are going in communication and marketing with access control, like that dot in the middle is what my job is on a daily basis.
Well, you mentioned two things. First of all, you talked about digitizing, and yes, we're in the tenant experience, workplace engagement sort of space, but the language that we're really focusing in on now is digitizing the customer experience in buildings,
Yeah.
and that's what it's all about. And it's not just have an app and that's your solution. It's what does that experience look like, and how do you make it more digital, and reduce friction and just improve the overall delivery of service. So, and obviously building access for us as well is a significant component. Um, and you just mentioned one other thing, and it is totally escaped the
Community.
hatch here. Community, thank you.
No problem.
So, and listen, community is where I started my career.
Yeah.
It's always been about helping building operators create community in buildings, and I think that is so important, particularly as we've just, when you and I first met, it was early days of 2020 and the pandemic, and we were all at that point just about to enter into a period of time where we would come to realize how we were starved for community.
Yep.
And I think buildings represent a unique opportunity to help build community and connect to neighborhoods and cities. And I don't think that theme should be underlooked in this world as it's evolved.
No, and I think it becomes even more important. And a lot of times, a lot of the conversations we have, you can bring it back to that is what it is. But it's also an interesting thing with access control that I like to bring about that talks about this is one of the reasons why I think we're having a moment is our industry forever has never really known who the end user is, like
Right.
of our industry. They've always been a card or a fob, and they've always been somewhat of a bit number inside of our system. And now all of a sudden we're having, between mobile phones and the interaction through applications and the rest of it, we have a new stakeholder that's come. And the bad is that we don't really have the user stories in the ethos of our industry for 30 years because we kept them safe. We just never knew who they were. And now we have to have an interaction in the new. So user experience, like user experience in our industry, it's kind of funny. Like our industry was forever about putting barriers up and actually creating friction. It was a
Right.
sense of security. Like the more barriers I put up in between you getting in helped increase the security posture of the building because it slowed you down, frankly, or kept you out. And now, though, that is in complete counter of
Totally.
the convenience side. That it is now, but I don't believe it will be long term. But
Mhm.
it's an addition too, because there are still places where you want to have that happen. I personally believe everything will be changed. It's just to be a case of when.
Right.
But there's markets, especially in commercial real estate, tenant engagement. I'm sorry, tenant in the enterprise space, where now you have to have high levels of security with levels of convenience.
Right.
And when you stir all that together, the soup is called user experience.
Right. Right. And let's remember that, pre-pandemic, for the most part, building operators really thought of their customers as just the decision makers who sign the lease every 5 to 10 years. So
Yeah.
I think we have a whole new appreciation for the importance of engaging with and supporting each and every person that walks into a building, and doing that in a very different way.
Yeah, but you know what that sounds like? Hospitality.
Oh, bingo. We've been saying for some time we just need to pull a page out of from the hospitality industry, and commercial real estate would be a whole lot better.
Yeah, I also think we could pull a page out of early web pages back in the day. Kind of like all of this is going on with tenant engagement and applicant work tech and the rest of it. Kind of reminds me when developers and builders were first had websites when basically all they did was they took their paper brochures and put them
Right.
online. And then
Yeah.
they're like, wait a minute, we could also have people pay rent on this thing. So there was like an operational efficiency opportunity. Then they're like, wait, we can also sell services through this app, through this website. And this all of a sudden became revenue generation. Like
Right.
you can say website or you can say now tenant engagement applications as like the same thing. So there's, just like a lot of things, there's some history here that I think if there was curiosity met with communication, we probably might learn a lot of sort of past experiences that help us maybe get the future to be here a lot sooner than it is.
Right. So in other words, we didn't just get here by chance. There's a lot of touch points along the way that led us here. That's an interesting insight.
Yeah.
So listen, I think we can both agree that buildings are now part of a much larger workplace ecosystem. The physical workspace is still integral or perhaps core, but people are going to continue to work from many different places, and that's something that technology needs to embrace and accept, and the industry needs to understand. You've just come back from CRETEC in London, so I would imagine lots of insights to share. But just in general, combined with your recent travel experience and your continued work in this field, what are you seeing right now? How are you seeing commercial real estate operators continue to reimagine their businesses to deliver ultimately, a better experience to meet these emerging needs from customers? What's sort of top of mind for you?
Yeah. So at CRETEC, we in London, we did this thing called the Day in a Life. So we called it the Access Control Village first. So we actually went and grabbed 10 companies to come together. 6 of the 10 worked together to create something called Day in a Life. And the
Mhm.
idea behind it was that I felt that there was a transition that happened over time at CRETEC where people would come and go booth by booth by booth. And it was really hard for them to know the difference between one booth to the next when it came to like our space.
Right.
Um, and what I wanted to do was I believed we were at a moment where people, if framed properly and they walked in like, oh, this is I'm going to learn about access control. It's like, great. Okay. So now I'm in that frame. Now tell me your story. I wanted to take it a step further with the idea being that I don't think they actually want to buy. And if you look at our industry, you don't typically ever just buy one product. It is a combination of many that creates an experience. So we wanted to show that when you walked in, you would use an application to get a credential, which then went to the turnstile, then went to the logical access to turn onto your computer, that went to the locker, that went to here, to here, here, and here. We kind of
Right.
went through that entire experience. Long way for me to get there is like what I saw happen more than anything else was you had commercial real estate owner operators and property managers walk up, be like, I want that. And it was like, what exactly they want? They're like, that. Whatever that is, I want that experience. So it clicked because some of these people were still already having conversations about that, but they
Mhm.
were doing it in isolation of the individual company, not the overall ecosystem on that side. So what I'm seeing is this desire to have an ecosystem sort of sell, not an individual product sale, but bringing all the different parts and pieces together. And they're really looking for like an easy button in a lot of
Yeah,
ways to basically
for
say,
sure.
Like, how do I get this with the least amount of friction to get this experience that we want? And I don't want to have 7,000 meetings with 7,000 different people. I
Yep.
want to be able to push and look at that thing and say, I want that. So to me, that's what I saw. The other thing that I saw there was sort of a groundswell of like other amenities and things that are going on. It's almost a table stakes conversation in a lot of ways of the experience that, if you go to 22 Bishopgate there and see the experience that happens on that, you're starting to now see buildings having to have those things to keep clients and bring in or whatever like new ones that are there. So I think we're moving to almost at some point, it's like it's moving to a marketing differentiation currently now, and I think it becomes a standard sort of expectation of how a system, how a building operates. Um, which right now it's historically been a nice to have, and I think it becomes a need to have. I think
Right.
it's a good summary, and you're starting to see that.
Yep.
We're not there yet by any means. The third thing that I saw was everybody wants to talk about new construction, but the transition into retrofit is going to be, I think, i- out of control compared to. There's a lot more existing buildings than there are
For
new
sure.
ones going to be built globally. And I think
Yes.
the ability to go after that retrofit market will drive a whole bunch of opportunity, new experiences, new products, new technology, new partners, all of that. Um, those are like the three that I'm seeing happen, at least within our space, within the commercial real estate market.
Right. Some great insights there, and I'll just start with the notion of retrofit, and certainly that's going to take a huge chunk out in the B and C market, right? Which is massive. It's 80% of the industry, so a lot of opportunity there. And likely you're right. New development will slow, and there's going to be a lot of real estate that needs to, we need to figure out its value, its purpose, and its use. So a lot of opportunity there. So those are some great insights. And I think obviously a tremendous amount of opportunity. What you created in that sort of ecosystem of partners that can collaborate, and then someone comes up and says, I want that, and that was not one, but it was the whole. We take a similar view, and recognize that it is about sort of the technology stack that is ultimately presented. It's not necessarily one partner can do it all. But we also look at it even a little bit further and say it's not even just the tech within the building, but it's also how can technology enable that building to be now part of that neighborhood or part of that community or part of that city? And what does that mean for technology as people move between places, between buildings, between where their head office is and maybe a co-working space? How do we recognize that it's a very decentralized kind of world today, and that's what we're excited about and doing a lot of thinking around.
Yeah, no, this whole ecosystem opportunity, and if you think of the building as a city amongst itself, it's like a city within a city. How do you bring the external city into the city that it is, its own? Like we will get there. I truly do believe it'll be, you know, at least from our standpoint, like our industry is very hardware driven, and software is like new. So there's sort of like this rebirth about hardware becoming sexy because of the digitalization of it, what can happen with it. So, which I actually also think is there's an opportunity here for a thing that was purchased for a single use to now have exponential value that goes beyond that single thing. And
Mm-hmm.
there's something exciting about that. And then we're just talking about that from the single building itself. When you start to then think about how it can extend beyond just the individual building that it's in, but now that turnstile is actually attached to a greater ecosystem.
Right.
Just even opens up even more opportunity. That's why I think in our industry, the high security industry has been reported to be about a $10 billion global opportunity, outside of China, like everywhere else.
Mm-hmm.
We believe it's actually a $70 billion opportunity when we did the math that goes beyond the high security. So this is the value creation on top of what's already there. It's not in lieu of, it's in addition to. And I do believe even if you get even further into the ESG side of our industry, the S part of it for our industry is a $100 billion opportunity. That
Right.
is that's all built off of a lot of the traditional hardware that's in our space, and it's exponentially built upon it. It's not in lieu of. So
Right.
that's interesting to me because I can start to imagine the just the value creation and the importance of the industry. Like our companies can go from small to big, and like, or there's just a lot there that could happen.
Mm-hmm. I'm curious on your thoughts about how closely should building owners and operators be working with their customers, the occupier, in terms of, just attracting and retaining the best talent, helping them ultimately to build great companies, and particularly through your lens of building access. So are you more focused on the building operator? Are you also talking to occupiers? And where do you think the opportunity is for the two to be collaborating together?
Yeah, I mean, it wasn't too long ago, and there's still plenty of examples you can give, and I think there will be, even as we continue to go forward, they may become less, and the new becomes the majority. But it used to be our industry. You would sell the shell, and somebody else would sell the interior, and it was a
Right.
classic case where you would sell the shell of the building to the owner, and then the system didn't work internally. That's why a lot of places, if you've ever had two fobs, two cards, a card and a key, because one of them got you into the building, then one got
Mhm.
into your unit. That is our industry in living color over the years, and that's completely shifted now to where there's at least more conversations around all of that seamlessly working together, and it sometimes is driven from the tenant into the building, and sometimes it's the building to the tenant. And there's a new stakeholder that you have to have a conversation. It's forcing our industry to even recognize that there's a tenant within that building, and having people selling into it and building use case stories and features and functions and all the thing that have to go to it. We still have a lot of work to do in that area, but it's
Mhm.
definitely, and I would even say there's a third, is the people working for that tenant in that
Right.
building,
Right.
that we're just starting. As an industry, we've sucked at that completely. Like we've, like I said, we've never really paid attention to them. But now, if you think about it, if I go to this building 2 or 3 times a week now, or
Yep.
once, or whatever, once a month, whatever it might be, and I go, and the card, the fob, the mobile credential they gave me, I go to go use it, and the system doesn't work, and it doesn't let me in. That's a bad user experience, and I'm probably going to report that in some way when I get my engagement survey from the HR department about how I'm feeling about the company. That people are going to start to say, like, every time I come to this building, you make me come. Every time I do come to it, it's like the first time I've ever been there, and I'm not welcomed at all.
Right.
And that is completely like, if you asked our industry, we're like, yeah, it's working. But it changes the relationship completely of letting the right people in versus keeping bad people out.
Right.
And that stakeholder now, that end user, the way we talk to them, the communication, the experience that we deliver to them is going to go beyond a blue or green light blinking now, or red, saying no. It's going to be a completely different. And you're seeing it in the visitor management and intercom space and the rest, where these large sort of towers that have video on them, and that you can talk to someone. Like, we're starting to nibble into it around, and recognize that experience has to be better.
Well, I think two things. First of all, I think early prop tech companies were so focused on selling technology to buildings that none of them, and perhaps even still today, are doing enough thinking around the consumer, the customer, the end user. I know that we've always been focused on that only because of our DNA being in the service industry, focused on helping building operators connect to their customers. That's how we've grown up. And so we all are always thinking about the end user. But I think that's the real opportunity, because that's also the customer of the building that has been absent for the most part for the last several years. And if we don't, really focus in on them, we're going to continue to miss that boat.
Well,
Um,
yeah, but I mean, to be fair too, there's never been really a direct line to revenue generation either. So when businesses were looking at who they make money from, you could almost ignore them for quite a while, and do it. But I do think you do it at your own peril now, moving forward.
for sure, for sure. Um, we talked a lot earlier about community and how buildings, really are a part of community. Just any other thoughts on sort of, how providing the opportunity for buildings to be more connected to the community beyond, again, just that immediate, their immediate core customer. Does building access play a role in that?
I think so. Like, so I'll give you an example of how, and I don't have all the answers with this, but just some thoughts and ideas. And I would say, by nature, I would say yes, and then go figure it out, type of a thing. Um, but I look at what goes on out in the outside world and say, how does that? So let's take an example like Microsoft Places. I don't know if you're familiar with it,
Yeah.
but they rolled
Yeah.
this thing out, right? Where you now can give credentials to people based off of Outlook and where their calendar is, and take the digital. So not only can you sign into a meeting digitally, but now can I, if I happen to be in New York City, and I want to team with some people to have this meeting in person, I can give access now through through, Outlook. Like,
Right.
so I think about, oh, okay. So think about this sort of downstream of that. Now, my enterprise software tool that is here to manage my schedule and collaboration and email and the rest of it is kind of fundamentally now my access control system
Hmm.
in a weird way, right?
Hmm.
What downstream impacts it has, I have some opinions on that, but ultimately the impact that it has, I don't know. Like I just think it's going to look very, very different, and it does play a role to where at some point the virtual and physical world are ubiquitous. So it also, I think, I start to think about sort of digital space connected to the physical building itself and the relationship that exists there. I might not separate the difference between the two.
Right.
And if that's the case, again, if I'm the end user as a building and a building owner and operator, what opportunities and permission to play there do I have?
Right.
I don't know. Like, could I? This is where I know, again, people talk about the digital world of like real estate and the digital world, and without getting into whether people believe in Web3 and the rest of it, but there's something there. Like,
Yeah.
if I'm showing up to work online or in person, there's a relationship there somehow.
Right.
What
Yeah.
opportunities does the building? I don't know.
No, no, it's interesting. And to what extent should the building be thinking more about that so that it can lay ownership to that piece of the experience as well, and it's a more holistic solution.
Yeah.
Uh, that's definitely something we could talk about more, and I'm sure we will. Let's take a short commercial break, and we'll be right back.
This episode of 10 is proudly brought to you by Hilo. Hilo is a rapid deployment workplace engagement platform for the hybrid world that enables building operators to connect to their tenants, whether they are at work, at home, or anywhere in between. We are in the midst of a seismic shift in the evolution of the workplace. Now more than ever, it's clear that the most important asset of a building is the people. Commercial real estate leaders recognize that tenants and employees want new kinds of spaces, services, and amenities to support having the flexibility to work from anywhere. Workplace engagement solutions that connect hybrid working people to buildings no matter where they are have become a major differentiator as buildings compete to retain current tenants and attract new ones. Hilo empowers building operators to meet this challenge. To learn more about Hilo and schedule a demo, visit hiloapp.com.
And now I'd like to welcome back to the show Lee Odess, Chief Executive Officer, Access Control Executive Brief. Again, Lee, it's great to be having our conversation again today.
Absolutely.
We know that technology is playing such a huge role in how building operators deliver experience, customer experience, how they're digitizing their buildings to ultimately improve the relationship with their tenant, their customer. Certainly, workplace engagement is uppermost in everyone's mind, and we look for opportunities to do things differently. So, obviously, building access is uppermost in your mind, but just in general, either in that arena or elsewhere, what are you seeing in terms of new technologies that are gaining traction and really helping to change the game for building operators and their customers?
Yeah, I mean, again, selfishly within the access control space right now, everybody's talking about the wallets within the mobile devices. That's somewhat of a hot topic. It's you're starting to see adoption roll out and the rest of it to where I now can use my phone as my key, and I can tap to get in utilizing NFC. And it's really, I mean, Apple is the one that is sort of shepherding the message more mainstream on that side, opening up the operating system and the wallet to give people the capability to go do that. That is sort of the main driver, which I think is great, for many reasons. Number one, the habitual change of how our industry works from issuance of credentials out to people. So instead of having
Right.
to go to the card office to go pick it up, and if I lose it, what do I do? Blah blah blah. I now can request a credential or have it sent to me within my phone. And as a user, it's part of my daily way I function. I go to the metro or the train that way. I pay for my lunch that way. Why couldn't I
Right.
get into my building that way, right?
Yep.
So I also then think about, great, if that happens, what else can it do? So this is where I think it gets kind of interesting and will only accelerate some of the things that we talked about, whether it's the experiences and bringing in the outside world into the building and the rest of it. There's a relationship there that is going to be very different than what it has historically been on that side. So that to me is very exciting. The other one is that I, right now we're hearing a lot about, of course, is around AI.
Hmm.
And if we were to, outside of that, using a word that people like to use so they don't get perceived as being dumb, Like if I don't use it, sort of like how it used to be around big data and all these other things. So when you start to click into an AI, some practical things that we're seeing is we're seeing software companies come and layer on top of legacy systems to make those systems more modern, mainstream, actionable, more valuable. So there's companies in our space now that are taking sort of the flat file reports and really bringing that to life a bit to where it not only delivers better security, it also delivers better user experience and for the user. So that's interesting to take a look at. Where historically, again, if you went to our industry about that, we'd say, nah, you don't need it. So where now there's plenty of opportunities of people. It's like, oh, cool, I can leave the no, you don't need it people alone and go over here to this group that has figured out how to say yes and deliver some value to us on that side. That's interesting. I also believe we're going to continue to see an evolution there, because if you think within the building space, this is where I think uh, we'll see a lot of adoption. In our world, there's always been this sort of conversation in the access control world about convergence with video, like the two of them come together.
Yep.
Super nerdy, not necessarily a mainstream message, but as it starts to go mainstream, I think what you're actually looking for there is high levels of security with high levels of throughput. And there's no better place for that to happen than a lobby of a building.
Mm-hmm.
You want people that should get through quickly, that need to be, and people that aren't known that should to go to a place to get credentials or not, and be kept out or let in to go through quick. And I really believe that that's going to be a combination of access control video and artificial intelligence to allow high levels of assurance with high levels of convenience.
Mm-hmm.
That's coming, and it's you're starting to see it. It's been primarily done as integration, which is really, kind of getting there to interoperability and automation and the rest of it, but it's a step to get there. But now I think we're going to start to see, and I think it's going to hit a click at some point where it starts to just explode versus this incremental sort of growth that we've been seeing right now. The other thing I would tell you that is interesting in our world is, and I think it trickles down into the building operator and owners, is around choice in a lot of cases. Not necessarily technology, it kind of is, but you're seeing the moats and the barriers of entry for a lot of lock and access control companies to come from Europe and Asia into North America to go into Europe and Asia and the rest of the markets, was always really high, because every country basically had a different type of opening, the lock physically, like how it was done. So the ability to have enough money and resources and whatever to go do that was really limited. Now, though, because of software centricity of these companies, software first, mobile first, cloud first,
Right,
and these hardware companies opening up their hardware to work with these systems, you're seeing an influx of people come in with really interesting, good ideas,
right.
and products. And I mean, there's some garbage in there too, let's be honest. But there's more positive on that side, which I think it's sort of like iron on iron in a lot of ways, which I think will elevate uh, the entire industry, especially within ours, which then trickles to the customer base. And I find that to be extremely interesting.
So we've already been seeing, and maybe specific to building access, that there's been some consolidation within the market. And there's also been new entrants into the market. Do you think within the building access area, we're still going to see that happening specific to your industry? Do you think that even though there are some very mature companies, some relatively new ones, there's still opportunity that has not yet been realized by existing partners?
Yeah, I mean, that's where I talk about the 10 to 70 billion dollar additional value creation and upwards of 100 billion. So yes, 100%, there's ample opportunity. There's also opportunity in staying in the 10 billion and doing 8 to 6% growth
Right.
that we've seen forever. Like that doesn't mean that that's bad. It just means, like, who do you want to be and what do you want to go do, and in being comfortable with who you are and what you're doing. So that is there. I do think consolidation, yeah, like you're starting to see it in different verticals, like multifamily residential right now. There's definitely consolidation happening in that area. We saw it in hospitality. I think we'll see it in commercial real estate. We'll see it in life sciences, the enterprise side. I do, yes. I also, though, think it's going to be a little bit confusing, because I think there's going to be so much more of companies that it may not look like consolidation is happening. But you started to see it, to where companies are starting to recognize that access control is a fundamental part of how their systems are going to work. Plus the stickiness of our industry, because it's installed and it's there and it's a need, is that more people that come from maybe the data side of it are starting to take a look at it as something, and also our industry looking at it also going upward into the enterprise. That's why I think the biggest impact that's happening in our industry is not IT convergence. I think it's the introduction of enterprise software. And with enterprise software brings a lot of things that come from the enterprise software, where like new channels, new ways of thinking, new expectations. Like we're having more conversations as an industry around interoperability. We did a survey with the PropTech Advisory Board within the Security Industry Association that worked with CRETech, and surveyed thousands of owner operators, and the thing that it was a negative 86% of respondents, I think it was 86 or 83, going off the top of my head, call it 80, that said that the interoperability within our industry is negative, poor, bad, like not good. 86, 80, 84, whatever, right? Which is, when in the enterprise software world, you see a lot more interoperability, you see a lot more openness. Like, so we're starting to have more conversations because external forces are coming in saying, yeah, send me your APIs, your SDKs, you know what, we're open source. And we're all like, yeah, we don't do any of that stuff. Like, so, but now you're starting to see everybody do it. All the hardware companies need the software companies now, and all the software companies need the hardware. Whether they all like it or not, they're all having to get in a room and work together.
They all got to play together. And I think that's a great way to sort of wrap up this part of the conversation. Definitely important. And Lee, thanks so much for sharing not only your recent experience in London, but also just, everything that you're doing in the industry. It's always informative for me, and I'm sure it will be for our listeners. Before we wind up our closing speed round, an opportunity to get to know you a little bit better. So when you're not working, what do you enjoy doing?
I enjoy spending time with my family and running.
Good for you. Favorite beverage of choice: hot, cold, alcoholic?
Yeah, I would say hot. Like, and I do like coffee.
Okay. Any favorite movie or current TV series that's capturing your nighttime entertaining attention?
We just finished up Ted Lasso, so I would say that took up a good amount of my time.
Yeah, we did as well. We just watched the last episode the end of last week, and it was awesome.
And maybe because I'm spending more time in London, I just started watching Peaky Blinders. So,
right. Okay. Name one way in which technology has improved how you live your life, or work life as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think in my life was the relationship that my children have with my parents, their grandparents.
Right.
Like I think about the relationship I had with mine, and it was phone calls and trips.
Yeah.
Now I look at the relationship that my kids have with their grandparents, and it's far richer, far deeper. And, I have to remember the stories of, the past, and they it's like a living color with them every single day.
Right. You're working on your own, so maybe this question isn't as relevant, but in terms of a personal choice for days spent in person, working with colleagues or working from anywhere, you're probably more so working from the anywhere camp. But any thoughts on that? What you either personally or what you're seeing?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's anywhere, and even a solo entrepreneur like myself, there's still community, and I need those common connections with people. I don't do this all by myself. Like, even though I may be the only person that is on the payroll, but I've got an informal board of directors, if you would, being the community of people I represent the community in a lot of ways, as well as there's people that I'm invested in just personally that help me and I help them. And so it's a combination of all of that. And I think that's the biggest thing that I would summarize it is, it's called choice.
Right. I'm with you on that. I don't think, but again, personally, I take a more mainstream approach, and I think choice is a good word. I don't think we should be mandated to come back. I don't think, those that suggest we should never come back doesn't make a lot of sense to me. And I think choice does give everyone the best of all worlds, and that's exciting for our industry.
It is.
Lee, thank you so much for coming back and having another conversation on the program. Clearly, there's still lots to talk about, and we enjoy doing so. I look forward to episode 3, and I guess we could plan maybe 2 or 3 years from now. I imagine the world will still look a little bit different than it does today, and we'll see what that looks like.
Yeah, I think we can count on the fact that things will always be a little bit different than they were yesterday.
Right.
No, thank you for doing this.
My pleasure, and we'll talk soon. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Bye now. I want to thank Lee Odess for joining me on this episode of 10 and for contributing to the global conversation around buildings being part of a robust ecosystem, helping to build great companies, and that they are vital in the effort to cultivate and support great people and teams. The future of the workplace will likely take many forms, and we will continue to explore what that looks like together. Subscribe to 10 for more conversations with leading CRE industry professionals and experts who all have something to say about tenant experience and the future of the workplace. We love hearing from you, so if you enjoyed this episode of 10, please share, add your rating, and review us through your preferred podcast provider. If you or someone you know would like to be a guest on a future episode, please reach out to me directly at david@hiloapp.com. And until our next episode, I wish you all continued success in building community where you work and live. Thank you.